Part 1. Whispers from the Deep. The name Atlantis. It echoes through millennia, a whisper from the deep, a phantom civilization swallowed by the sea. Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, first chronicled the tale, describing a magnificent island nation, advanced in technology and culture, poised to conquer the known world. But its ambition, he wrote, angered the gods, and in a single cataclysmic day and night, Atlantis vanished beneath the waves. For centuries, we've dismissed it as myth, a cautionary tale of hubris and divine retribution. But what if, hidden within the legend, lies a kernel of truth? What if Atlantis wasn't merely an island, but a vast, interconnected empire, a global power lost not just to the sea, but to time itself? The standard narrative paints Atlantis as an isolated power in the Atlantic Ocean, a geographical anomaly with no connection to the broader human story. We are asked to believe that this advanced civilization sprang up in isolation, developed sophisticated technology and governance, and then disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only Plato's account. But this narrative raises more questions than it answers. How could such a sophisticated society emerge in complete isolation? Where is the archaeological evidence? And if Atlantis was truly so powerful, why haven't we found even a sliver of its supposed technological prowess? Perhaps the answer lies in reimagining the scope of Atlantis itself. What if we've been looking in the wrong place, focusing too narrowly on a single, submerged island? Imagine, instead, a global network of Atlantean settlements, interconnected by trade routes, shared knowledge, and a unified cultural identity. This wouldn't be a single island nation, but a sprawling empire, with its influence stretching across continents. This perspective immediately resolves some of the inherent contradictions within the traditional Atlantis narrative. The development of advanced technology and governance becomes less miraculous when viewed through the lens of cultural exchange and shared innovation. The lack of definitive archaeological evidence in the Atlantic becomes less problematic if we consider that the primary Atlantean centers might have been located elsewhere. And perhaps, most importantly, the catastrophic downfall of Atlantis takes on a new, more nuanced meaning. If Atlantis was a global empire, its demise wouldn't have been a localized event. It would have been a global catastrophe, a cataclysm that reshaped the world and left scars on the collective memory of humankind. This catastrophe might have been geological, a series of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis that shattered the interconnectedness of the Atlantean world. Or perhaps it was climatological, a sudden shift in weather patterns, a prolonged drought, or a devastating ice age that crippled the empire's agricultural base and led to widespread famine and societal collapse. Or perhaps, as Plato suggests, it was a combination of natural disasters and human folly, a perfect storm of hubris, environmental degradation, and divine retribution. The possibility of a global Atlantean empire also opens up exciting new avenues of inquiry. Could the sudden advancements in agriculture, metallurgy, and astronomy seen in various cultures around the world during the Neolithic period be attributed to Atlantean influence? Could the megalithic structures scattered across the globe, from the pyramids of Egypt to the stone circles of Stonehenge, be remnants of Atlantean engineering? Could the flood myths present in countless cultures represent fragmented memories of the cataclysm that brought down Atlantis? These are tantalizing questions, and while we may never have definitive answers, the very act of asking them forces us to reconsider our understanding of human history. To find Atlantis, we must look beyond the confines of the Atlantic Ocean and broaden our perspective. We must consider the possibility that the whispers of this lost civilization are not confined to a single location, but are embedded in the very fabric of our collective past. We must be willing to challenge established narratives, to explore alternative interpretations of archaeological and geological data, and to embrace the possibility that the history we thought we knew is incomplete, that there are chapters yet to be discovered, stories yet to be told. The search for Atlantis is not just a search for a lost city, it's a search for ourselves, for the missing pieces of our own history, for the echoes of a forgotten past that may hold the key to understanding our present and shaping our future. It's a journey into the depths of time, a quest to uncover the truth behind the legend, to separate fact from fiction, and to finally answer the question, what if Atlantis was real? What if it was more than just an island, but a global empire, lost not just to the sea, but to the sands of time? The glyphs, once mesmerizing in their intricate beauty, now seem to writhe on the parchment. Professor Armitage traced their serpentine forms with a trembling finger. The headache, a dull throb that had begun in the archives, intensified, a pressure building behind his eyes. He pushed his spectacles up his nose, the familiar gesture failing to provide comfort. Outside, the London fog pressed against the windowpanes of his study, mimicking the claustrophobic dread that coiled in his gut. He'd initially been elated, certain he'd stumbled upon the missing link in his decades-long research into the myth of Atlantis. The ancient Sumerian tablet, acquired through dubious channels, spoke of a civilization far older than any recorded, a vast, maritime empire that ruled not just an island, but the very fabric of time itself. They called themselves the Iku Ishtu, the masters of the tide. But the more he deciphered, the more the elation curdled into a chilling unease. The tablet described rituals, horrific sacrifices designed to appease something. Something beyond human comprehension, residing in the depths, kept at bay by the Iku Ishtu's mastery of temporal energies. And it hinted at a cataclysm, not just a sinking city, but a tearing of reality itself, caused by the master's hubris. Now, these newly discovered glyphs, etched on a weathered piece of what appeared to be human skin, spoke of the aftermath. They described pockets of distorted time, echoes of the Iku Ishtu's reign, scattered across the globe. Places where the veil was thin, where the master's influence, and that of the entity they worshipped, could seep through. The scratching began subtly, a faint scraping against the brickwork of his chimney. Armitage ignored it, attributing it to the wind and the old house settling. He continued reading, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. The glyphs spoke of a resurgence, of the Iku Ishtu's attempts to rebuild their shattered empire, using these pockets of distorted time as anchors. The scratching grew more insistent, accompanied now by a low, guttural growl that resonated within the chimney's depths. Armitage finally looked up, his breath catching in his throat. The fire in the hearth had died, leaving only embers that glowed faintly in the encroaching darkness. Shadows danced across the walls, elongated and grotesque. The growl intensified, morphing into a series of wet, clicking sounds, like teeth gnashing against bone. Armitage pushed his chair back, knocking over a stack of books in his haste. The skin parchment fluttered to the floor, the glyphs seeming to pulsate in the dim light. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes fixed on the fireplace. A dark, viscous fluid began to ooze from the chimney's mouth, dripping onto the hearthstones and sizzling like acid. The smell was overwhelming, a putrid blend of seawater and decaying flesh. The clicking sounds grew louder, closer. Something was coming. Armitage stumbled backwards, knocking against his desk. He fumbled for the poker, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grip it. The room grew colder, a frigid draft emanating from the fireplace. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, and the shadows on the walls began to writhe and coalesce. A long, slender tentacle, slick with the black ooze, snaked out of the chimney. It probed the air, its surface covered in razor-sharp barbs. Armitage gasped, his mind reeling. This wasn't just a creature, it was something else. Something ancient, alien, imbued with the warped energies of a forgotten age. Another tentacle emerged, followed by another, and another. They writhed and coiled, their barbs clicking together like the mandibles of some colossal insect. The clicking grew faster, more frantic, as a grotesque, bulbous form began to squeeze its way out of the confined space of the chimney. Its skin was a sickly green, stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its head was elongated, with huge, black eyes that reflected the dying embers in the hearth. A gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth opened and closed, emitting a high-pitched whine that pierced Armitage's eardrums. He knew, with terrifying certainty, that this was no ordinary creature. This was a servant of the Iku Ishtu, a denizen of the depths, summoned from the shattered fragments of time. And it was here for him. Armitage raised the poker, his hand trembling. He knew it was a futile gesture, a pathetic defense against a creature from beyond human understanding. But he would not surrender. He would not let this abomination drag him into the abyss. As the creature lunged, its tentacles lashing out, Armitage closed his eyes and screamed. The scream was swallowed by the deafening roar of the entity, a sound that resonated not just in his ears, but in the very fabric of his being. A sound that promised not just death, but something far worse, oblivion. The last thing he felt was the cold, slimy grip of the tentacles, tightening around him, pulling him towards the darkness, towards the echoes of a lost empire, towards the waiting maw of the entity that resided in the depths of time. The rhythmic clicking intensified, echoing in the cavernous space of the submersible's cramped cabin. The sonar display painted a chaotic picture, shifting, undulating masses moving in the darkness beyond our lights. Dr. Menard, his face a ghostly white in the flickering luminescence, pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "They're changing formation," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Closing in. I felt a cold dread crawl up my spine. The creatures, whatever they were, had been circling us for the past hour, keeping a tantalizing distance. Their bioluminescent trails, a spectral ballet in the abyssal black, had initially filled us with awe. Now, they felt menacing, predatory. "Increase speed, Lieutenant," Menard directed, his voice cracking slightly. "Get us out of here." Lieutenant Costa gripped the controls, his jaw set. "Aye, Doctor." Engines to full. The submersible shuddered, the whine of the electric motors rising in pitch. We lurched forward, but the clicking grew louder, faster, as though the creatures were matching our speed. The sonar screen showed them closing in, their amorphous forms resolving into something disturbingly familiar. Long, slender limbs, tapering to sharp points. Bulbous central masses. "They look humanoid," I breathed, the words catching in my throat. Menard shook his head, his eyes wide with terror. "No, not humanoid, Atlantean." He pointed to an ancient sketch pinned to the bulkhead, a depiction from a salvaged Atlantean scroll. The drawing showed a creature similar to the ones on the sonar, but with intricate, almost ceremonial ornamentation adorning its elongated limbs. These creatures were stripped bare, their forms streamlined for the deep, their movements eerily graceful, yet undeniably hostile. The submersible bucked violently, throwing us against our restraints. A high-pitched screech echoed through the hull, metallic and grating, making my teeth ache. "They're attacking," Costa yelled over the din, wrestling with the controls. "Something's jamming the propulsion system." The lights flickered, plunging the cabin into momentary darkness, then returning with a sickly yellow glow. The clicking outside intensified, now accompanied by a low, rhythmic humming that resonated deep within our bones. The sonar screen went blank. We were blind, deafened, and trapped. Minutes stretched into an eternity, punctuated only by the relentless assault on the submersible's hull. The metallic screeching became a constant, nerve-shredding shriek. I could feel the vibrations through the floor, the relentless pressure of something vast and powerful pushing against us. Then, silence. The clicking stopped. The humming ceased. The screeching faded. The only sound was our ragged breathing, echoing in the oppressive darkness. What happened?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. Menard slowly shook his head, his face a mask of fear. "I don't know, but I don't think it's over." He was right. A low groan echoed through the water, a sound so deep and resonant it felt like the ocean itself was sighing. The submersible began to tilt, slowly at first, then faster, until we were listing precariously to one side. "We're sinking," Costa said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The groaning intensified, morphing into a guttural roar that vibrated through the hull. The submersible plummeted downwards, the pressure increasing with terrifying speed. Through the small viewing port, bathed in the eerie green glow of their bioluminescence, we saw them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of the Atlantean creatures, their elongated forms swirling around us like a vortex. They weren't attacking anymore, they were guiding us downwards, into the abyss. We plunged deeper and deeper, the pressure building until I felt like my bones would crush inwards. The temperature dropped precipitously, the cold seeping through the hull, chilling us to the core. And then, in the distance, we saw it. A light. Not the bioluminescence of the creatures, but something different. A warm, golden glow emanating from a vast, cyclopean structure that rose from the seabed like a colossal, skeletal hand reaching towards the surface. It was Atlantean architecture, unlike anything we had ever seen before. Vast, alien, and utterly terrifying. The submersible, now completely under the control of the creatures, drifted towards the structure, towards the light. As we drew closer, details began to emerge from the gloom. Intricate carvings covered the surface of the structure, depicting scenes of unimaginable horror, grotesque sacrifices, monstrous creatures, and what appeared to be humans, contorted in agony. The golden light pulsed, growing brighter, revealing the entrance to the structure, a gaping maw filled with darkness, beckoning us inwards. We were being drawn into the heart of Atlantis. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that we were not meant to return. This was just the beginning. The creatures had brought us here, not to kill us, but to show us something. To show us the true face of their lost empire. And I had a terrible feeling that whatever we were about to witness would shatter our understanding of history, of humanity, and of the very nature of reality itself. The flickering gaslight cast elongated, dancing shadows across the cramped cabin of the Poseidon's Fury. Captain Elias clutched the brittle parchment, its Atlantean script a chilling puzzle against the dim light. The deciphered portions haunted him, the deep ones. They slumber, awaken them not. His first mate, a grizzled man named Finn, peered over his shoulder. Anything new, Captain? Elias shook his head. Just more warnings. Warnings we seem intent on ignoring. They were now 3 days into their expedition into the uncharted waters of the Devil's Triangle. The compass spun erratically, the air grew heavy with a strange, metallic tang, and the normally playful dolphins that escorted their vessel had vanished without a trace. The crew, a hardy bunch accustomed to the unpredictable nature of the sea, were growing increasingly uneasy. Whispers spread like wildfire below deck, whispers of strange lights beneath the waves, of unnatural currents, and of a chilling silence that swallowed the usual oceanic murmur. That silence was what unnerved Elias the most. It was the silence of a held breath, the pregnant pause before a scream. That night, the silence broke. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ship, starting subtly, like the distant drone of a giant insect. It quickly escalated, resonating in the very bones of the vessel. The crew scrambled on deck, their faces etched with fear. The hum intensified, accompanied now by a faint, rhythmic pulsing that seemed to emanate from the depths below. "What in God's name is that?" Finn shouted over the din, his voice laced with panic. Elias, his heart pounding against his ribs, scanned the horizon. The sea remained eerily calm, its surface reflecting the star-dusted sky like a sheet of black glass. But beneath that glassy surface, he knew, something was stirring. Something ancient, something powerful. Then, the lights began. Phosphorescent green orbs materialized beneath the waves, growing in intensity and number, until the sea seemed alive with a spectral fire. They swirled and danced in intricate patterns, a mesmerizing yet terrifying spectacle. The pulsing grew stronger, synchronized with the lights, creating a hypnotic rhythm that threatened to overwhelm their senses. A scream ripped through the night. One of the crewmen, a young lad named Thomas, pointed a trembling finger towards the bow. Rising from the depths, bathed in the eerie green light, was a colossal structure. It was made of a dark, shimmering material unlike anything Elias had ever seen. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings and strange, bioluminescent symbols that pulsed in time with the underwater lights. It rose slowly, majestically, its scale dwarfing the Poseidon's Fury. It was not a natural formation. It was architecture, Atlantean architecture. Panic erupted on deck. Men scrambled for the lifeboats, their fear overriding all sense of discipline. Finn rushed to Elias's side. "Captain, we have to get out of here," he yelled. Elias stared transfixed at the emerging structure, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. He remembered the warnings on the parchment, the chilling prophecy of the deep ones. This was it. This was the awakening. Suddenly, the pulsing stopped. The lights dimmed, leaving a ghostly afterglow in their wake. The colossal structure, now fully emerged, hung silently in the water, a dark, monolithic presence that radiated an aura of ancient power. A hush fell over the crew. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull of the ship. Then, a new sound emerged. A low, guttural chanting, emanating from the structure itself. It was a language Elias couldn't understand, yet it resonated deep within his soul, evoking a primal fear he had never known he possessed. The chanting grew louder, more insistent. The surface of the water around the structure began to churn. Something was rising. From the depths of the ocean, shrouded in the spectral green afterglow, emerged shapes. They were humanoid, yet distinctly alien. Their skin was a sickly pale green, their eyes large and black, devoid of pupils. They moved with an unnatural grace, their long, spindly limbs propelling them through the water with unnerving speed. The deep ones. They surrounded the Poseidon's Fury asterisk, their black eyes fixed on the terrified crew. The chanting intensified, becoming a deafening chorus that seemed to vibrate the very air. Elias felt a cold dread wash over him, a certainty that their doom was at hand. He gripped the Atlantean parchment, the cryptic warnings now etched into his mind. He had ignored them, and now they were paying the price. As the Deep Ones began to climb the sides of the ship, their long, clawed fingers reaching towards the screaming crew, Elias knew that this was not just the end of their expedition. It was the beginning of something far more terrifying, the beginning of the return of Atlantis. And with it, the return of its ancient, horrifying guardians. The rhythmic chanting from the submerged city grew louder, a deep, resonating thrum that vibrated through the hull of the submersible, through my bones, into the very marrow. The sonar screen, once depicting the geometric precision of Atlantean architecture, now pulsed with an unsettling organic flicker. The city seemed to breathe. "Readings are off the charts, Captain," Alvarez whispered, his voice tight with the fear I shared. "Energy signatures unlike anything we've ever seen. It's like the city is waking up." The submersible shuddered. Small, bioluminescent organisms, disturbed by some unseen force, swarmed past the viewport in a chaotic ballet of light and shadow. The elegant Atlantean structures outside began to shimmer, their surfaces dissolving into a hazy, almost liquid form. The geometric precision was gone, replaced by something organic, writhing. The city wasn't just waking, it was metamorphosing. "Surface," I yelled, slamming my fist on the intercom. "Get us out of here now." The submersible lurched upwards, its engines straining against an unseen resistance. We were being held, not physically, but by something far more insidious. A low, guttural hum filled the cabin, drowning out the frantic whirring of the engines. The hum resonated with the chanting, weaving a hypnotic spell that dulled my thoughts and slowed my movements. "Captain," Alvarez cried, his eyes wide with terror. "Look." He pointed towards the viewport. The shimmering cityscape had coalesced into a single, gargantuan form. A face of unimaginable size, formed from the very substance of the city itself. Its features were fluid, constantly shifting, yet undeniably ancient and malevolent. Two enormous eyes, luminous and cold, stared directly at us. I could feel their gaze penetrating the steel hull, boring into my soul. The chanting intensified, becoming a deafening roar. The submersible bucked and groaned, the pressure increasing exponentially. We were trapped, held fast in the grip of this resurrected leviathan. This is it, I thought, a chilling acceptance washing over me. This is how it ends. But then, as abruptly as it began, the roar ceased. The pressure lessened. The face, still visible through the viewport, seemed to observe us. The eyes, no longer filled with malevolent intent, held a strange, almost clinical curiosity. We were specimens, held under a cosmic microscope. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the submersible began to ascend. As we rose, the gargantuan face receded into the murky depths, its features dissolving back into the shimmering cityscape. The chanting faded, replaced by the familiar hum of the engines and the hiss of the oxygen tanks. We broke the surface with a gasp, the blinding sunlight a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness below. We were alive, unbelievably, miraculously, alive. Back on the research vessel, the silence was heavy, broken only by the gentle rocking of the waves. Alvarez and I sat in the observation deck, staring blankly at the calm sea. We had witnessed something beyond human comprehension, something that shattered our understanding of history, of science, of reality itself. "What was that?" Alvarez finally whispered, his voice hoarse. I shook my head. I didn't know. All I knew was that Atlantis wasn't just a lost city. It was something else. Something alive. Something ancient and powerful beyond our wildest imaginings. The next few days were a blur. We returned to port, shaken and silent. The submersible was immediately impounded, its data logs confiscated. We were debriefed, our accounts met with skepticism and disbelief. They called it a hallucination, a side effect of pressure sickness. They refused to believe us. But we knew. We had seen it. The world continued, oblivious to the slumbering leviathan beneath the waves. But for us, everything had changed. We lived with the constant, gnawing fear that what we had witnessed was only the beginning. The city had awakened. It had observed us. And it would be back. One evening, weeks after our return, I found myself drawn to the ocean. I stood on the shore, the cool night air against my face, staring out at the dark expanse of water. The moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a silvery path across the waves. And then, I heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but undeniably there. The chanting. It was coming from deep beneath the waves, a low, resonating hum that vibrated through the sand, through my feet, into my very bones. The city was calling, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wasn't calling to me. It was calling to something else. Something far older, far more terrible, than anything we could possibly imagine. Something that had been waiting, patiently, in the abyss for millennia. And now, its time had come. The rhythmic clicking echoed in the cavern, a metronome counting down to some unknown horror. Elena clutched the flickering lantern tighter, its feeble light barely piercing the oppressive darkness that seemed to breathe around them. Behind her, Thomas muttered a prayer, his voice trembling. Ahead, Professor Armitage, his face a mask of grim fascination, continued to decipher the glyphs carved into the colossal obsidian wall. Time dilation, he whispered, his voice hoarse. They mastered it, bent it to their will. Elena shivered. The implications of his words were staggering, terrifying. The Atlanteans hadn't just disappeared. They had manipulated time itself, creating pockets, folds, echoes of their civilization scattered throughout history. That explained the anachronisms, the whispers of advanced technology in ancient cultures, the sudden disappearances. It explained the nightmare unfolding around them. But why? Thomas's voice cracked. Why fracture their own existence like this? Armitage ran a hand across the cold, smooth surface of the glyphs. Control, he breathed. Absolute control. Imagine, Thomas, a civilization existing across all of time. Pulling strings, influencing events, shaping the destiny of lesser races. Gods among men. The clicking grew louder, faster. It seemed to emanate from the darkness at the end of the cavern, a darkness that pulsed and shifted with an unnatural life. Elena felt a creeping dread, a primal fear that burrowed deep into her bones. This wasn't an archaeological dig anymore, it was a descent into madness. We need to go back, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. This place, it's not right. Armitage ignored her, his eyes fixated on the wall. He traced a series of symbols with his finger, his lips moving silently. A nexus, he murmured. A point of convergence. Suddenly, the clicking stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with an unseen energy. Elena could feel the hairs on the back of her neck prickling. Then, a low hum began to vibrate through the cavern floor, shaking the very foundations of the mountain. A shimmering, iridescent light began to bloom in the darkness at the end of the cavern. It grew in intensity, expanding, swirling, until it formed a swirling vortex of colors that defied description. It pulsed with a life of its own, a mesmerizing, terrifying beauty. Armitage let out a choked cry of triumph. I knew it, he exclaimed. A temporal rift. A gateway. Elena grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. Professor, we don't know what's on the other side. He shook her off, his eyes gleaming with a feverish light. We are about to find out, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. He took a step towards the rift. No, Thomas shouted, lunging forward. But it was too late. Armitage stepped into the swirling vortex, his form dissolving into the kaleidoscopic light. For a moment, his scream echoed through the cavern, a high-pitched wail of terror that was quickly swallowed by the hum of the rift. Then, silence. Elena and Thomas stood frozen, staring at the pulsating portal, their hearts pounding in their chests. The air crackled with residual energy, the faint smell of ozone stinging their nostrils. The silence stretched on, broken only by their ragged breathing. Then, a voice whispered from the rift. A voice that was both ancient and alien, resonating with a power that seemed to transcend human comprehension. It spoke in a language they didn't understand, yet they understood its meaning with chilling clarity. Come, asterisk. The rift pulsed, beckoning them forward. Thomas took a step back, his eyes wide with terror. We can't, he whispered. We have to get out of here. Elena felt a strange pull, a compulsion to step into the unknown. The voice echoed in her mind, seductive, promising. It whispered of secrets, of knowledge, of power. She knew she should run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The rift was a window into the abyss, and she found herself drawn to its terrifying depths. A cold hand gripped her arm. Thomas was staring at her, his face pale and drawn. Elena, he pleaded, don't. She looked at him, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Fear warred with curiosity, terror with a strange, inexplicable excitement. The voice whispered again, stronger this time, echoing in the deepest recesses of her being. Come, asterisk. Elena closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped into the rift. The world dissolved around her in a blinding flash of light. The clicking started again. This time, it was inside her head. The glyphs, when arranged correctly, resembled a grotesque parody of a human face, elongated and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into your soul. The unsettling hum resonated deeper now, a vibration that felt less like sound and more like a physical force pushing against my chest. Professor Armitage, his face bathed in the eerie blue light, traced the outline of the face with a trembling finger. The visage of the deep ones, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the thrumming. The legends, they spoke of this. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and filled with a terror I hadn't seen before. They spoke of a ritual, he continued, his voice cracking. A ritual to bring them back. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Bring who back? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. Armitage pointed to the central glyph, the one shaped like a spiraling vortex. The masters, he said, his voice a strangled gasp. The ones who ruled Atlantis, the ones who slumber in the deep ones. The hum intensified, and the air grew thick and oppressive. I could feel a pressure building in my ears, a sensation of being submerged, even though we were still within the confines of the cavern. The blue light pulsated, casting distorted shadows that danced and writhed across the walls. We need to leave, I said, my voice tight with a growing sense of dread. Now. Armitage didn't respond. He was transfixed by the glyphs, his eyes glazed over as if he were in a trance. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he resisted, his body rigid. They're calling, he murmured, his eyes fixed on the spiraling glyph. They're calling me home. A wave of nausea washed over me. The hum was now a deafening roar, vibrating through my very bones. The air shimmered, and I saw a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. Something was there, in the shadows, something vast and indistinct. I pulled at Armitage again, desperation clawing at me. Professor, we have to go. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled violently. Dust and debris rained down from the cavern ceiling. Cracks spider-webbed across the floor, glowing with an unnatural, phosphorescent green light. The humming reached a crescendo, and the air crackled with energy. Armitage let out a guttural cry, his body convulsing. The glyphs on the wall began to glow brighter, the blue light intensifying into a blinding white. I shielded my eyes, but it was no use. The light seared through my eyelids, burning its image onto my retinas. When I could see again, the cavern was transformed. The walls pulsed with a sickly green luminescence, and the air was thick with a salty, metallic tang. The ground was no longer solid stone but a shifting, viscous substance that resembled wet clay. And in the center of the cavern, where the glyphs had been, a swirling vortex of emerald green light had opened, stretching from floor to ceiling like a gaping maw. From the depths of the vortex, I heard a sound that chilled me to the core. It was a chorus of voices, ancient and alien, chanting in a language I couldn't understand yet somehow knew. It was a language of the deep, a language of nightmares. Armitage, his eyes now glowing with the same emerald green light as the vortex, turned to me, a horrifying grin splitting his face. They've answered, he said, his voice distorted and inhuman. The masters have returned. He stepped towards the vortex, his feet sinking into the viscous floor. I reached out to him, my hand trembling. Professor, don't. He laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that seemed to come from the vortex itself. They offer power, he said, his voice dripping with an unnatural ecstasy. Power beyond your wildest dreams. Join us. Become one with the deep ones. I recoiled in horror, stumbling backward as Armitage stepped into the swirling green light. His body began to dissolve, his flesh melting away as if consumed by acid. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, then vanished completely into the vortex. The chanting intensified, and the vortex expanded, its emerald light filling the cavern. The ground beneath me began to liquefy, pulling me downwards. I struggled, clawing at the viscous substance, but it was no use. I was being drawn into the depths, towards the source of the chanting, towards the ancient, unspeakable horror that awaited me in the abyss. The last thing I saw before the green light consumed me was a flicker of movement within the vortex, a glimpse of something vast and monstrous rising from the depths. It was a creature of nightmare, a being of immense power and malevolence, its form shifting and indistinct in the swirling green light. And as I plunged into the abyss, I knew, with chilling certainty, that Atlantis was not lost. It was waiting, and it was hungry. The glyphs swam before Amelia's eyes, shimmering like heat haze on asphalt. Days bled into nights in the cavernous archive, illuminated by the eerie, pulsating glow of the Atlantean technology. The air, thick with the scent of brine and something ancient, something almost metallic, clung to her like a shroud. Sleep offered no respite, filled with fragmented images of vast, sunken cities and creatures with eyes that burned like phosphorus. She was piecing it together, the horrific tapestry of Atlantis's fall. It wasn't a natural disaster, not a simple sinking beneath the waves. It was a deliberate act, a self-inflicted wound born from hubris and a desperate attempt to grasp something beyond human comprehension. The Atlanteans, at their zenith, had mastered temporal manipulation. They hadn't just conquered space, they'd begun to conquer time. Small jumps at first, corrections to errors, revisions to history. But their ambition, fueled by the whispers of the deep, the entities they'd foolishly believed they could control, grew exponentially. They sought to become the architects of eternity, to reshape the timeline in their image. Amelia shivered, the glyphs reflecting in the dilated pupils of her eyes. They hadn't just reshaped, they'd fractured it. Their meddling created splinters in the temporal stream, echoes of Atlantis resonating across different eras, each one a twisted, corrupted version of the original. This cavern, this archive, was trapped in one such splinter, a pocket of the past bleeding into the present. A low hum vibrated through the cavern floor, making the hairs on Amelia's arms stand on end. The glyphs on the walls pulsed faster, their light intensifying. A voice, ancient and resonant, filled the air, speaking in a language that felt like shards of ice against her mind. "You delve too deep, surface dweller," the voice echoed, laced with chilling amusement. "Some truths are best left undisturbed." Amelia felt a cold dread grip her heart. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that the voice wasn't originating from within the cavern. It was emanating from the splintered timeline itself, from the echoes of Atlantis that still reverberated across the fractured reality. Ignoring the instinctual urge to flee, she pressed on, driven by a morbid fascination, a need to understand the full extent of Atlantis's folly. The glyphs now depicted grotesque rituals, sacrifices made not to gods, but to the entities of the deep, the beings that whispered promises of power in exchange for everything. There were images of monstrous hybrids, creatures twisted into unnatural forms, experiments in merging Atlantean physiology with the denizens of the abyss. Amelia saw glimpses of what the Atlanteans became, beings no longer human, their bodies and minds warped by the temporal energies and the influence of the entities they'd so eagerly embraced. One image in particular seared itself into her memory. A vast, cyclopean city, built not of stone or metal, but of living flesh, pulsating and writhing beneath a crimson sky. Tendrils of energy crackled around it, distorting the very fabric of space and time. This was not Atlantis as it was, but Atlantis as it became in one of the splintered realities, a grotesque perversion of their once grand civilization. The humming intensified, the ground shaking beneath her feet. The voice returned, closer now, colder, filled with an almost tangible malice. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing, little one," it whispered, the sound seeming to invade her very thoughts. "Especially when it concerns things beyond your comprehension." The walls of the cavern began to shimmer and distort, the glyphs dissolving into a swirling vortex of light and shadow. Amelia felt a pulling sensation, a force dragging her towards the center of the room, towards the heart of the temporal anomaly. Panic clawed at her throat. She stumbled back, desperate to escape, but the force was too strong. The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality unraveling around her. She saw glimpses of other times, other places, flashing before her eyes like a broken film reel. A medieval battlefield, a futuristic cityscape, a prehistoric jungle, all fragmented, distorted, bleeding into one another. The voice, now a deafening roar, filled her mind. "You have seen too much. Now, you will become a part of it." Amelia screamed, a sound swallowed by the temporal vortex. The light intensified, blinding her. She felt a tearing sensation, as if her very being was being ripped apart, scattered across the fractured timelines. Then, darkness. And in the echoing silence that followed, the cavern was empty. The glyphs on the walls faded, the humming ceased. The only evidence of Amelia's presence was a faint, lingering scent of brine and fear, and the chilling whisper of a voice from a reality that should never have been. The splintered timelines of Atlantis had claimed another victim, another soul lost in the echoes of a fallen empire. And somewhere, in the distorted reflections of time, a cyclopean city of flesh pulsed and throbbed, awaiting the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon its secrets. The glyphs, bathed in the harsh light of my makeshift lamp, seemed to writhe. They weren't just carvings, but windows into a reality so alien, so unsettling, it felt like my sanity was fraying at the edges. I'd spent weeks deciphering fragments of the Atlantean language, meticulously piecing together their history from the scattered remnants within the sunken city. My base of operations, a crumbling temple miraculously preserved within a time-distorting field. I now knew more than I wanted to. Atlantis wasn't just an advanced civilization, it was a temporal empire, its tendrils reaching across millennia. They hadn't merely mastered the oceans, they had mastered time itself, establishing outposts in different eras, experimenting with the fabric of reality like children playing with fire. And the experiments, as I was beginning to understand, went horribly wrong. The glyphs before me detailed one such experiment, conducted in what I believed was the late Cretaceous period. They called it Project Chimera, and its purpose was to splice Atlantean DNA with that of the dominant life forms of the time, dinosaurs. The goal, seemingly, was to create bioengineered weapons, living siege engines capable of shattering the defenses of their temporal rivals. The glyphs spoke of early successes, monstrous hybrids bred for war. Then came the chillingly familiar pattern of hubris and catastrophic failure. The chimeras, too intelligent, too powerful, rebelled. The glyphs depicted scenes of carnage, Atlantean outposts overrun, their time-bending technology turned against them. The rebellion spiraled into a temporal war that ripped holes in the fabric of reality, creating pockets of distorted time and unleashing something. Something that wasn't of this world, nor any other I could comprehend. The glyphs referred to it only as the Voidbringer, a being of pure antimatter, drawn to the temporal disruptions like a shark to blood. The descriptions were fragmented, maddeningly vague, but one image stuck in my mind. A swirling vortex of darkness, consuming everything in its path, leaving behind only a chilling emptiness. The final glyphs of the sequence were damaged, almost obliterated. But the fragmented message was clear, the Voidbringer couldn't be contained. It slipped through the fractured timeline, its influence seeping into other eras, a creeping corruption that threatened to unravel reality itself. I stumbled back from the wall, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The air felt thick, heavy, as though the very atmosphere of the sunken city was suffocating me. I understood now why Atlantis had fallen, why its once glorious empire had crumbled into dust and echoes. They hadn't been conquered, they had been undone by their own arrogance, their insatiable thirst for power. And the horror they unleashed wasn't simply buried with their cities, it was woven into the fabric of time itself. A low growl resonated through the temple, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I froze, every nerve ending screaming danger. The growl came again, closer this time, accompanied by a slithering sound. I spun around, my lamp casting dancing shadows on the crumbling walls. Something moved in the darkness. My hand instinctively went to the antiquated Atlantean weapon I had salvaged, a pulse rifle that emitted a beam of concentrated temporal energy. I flicked the activation switch, the weapon humming with power. Slowly, cautiously, I advanced towards the source of the sound. The creature emerged from the shadows, and a wave of nausea washed over me. It was a grotesque parody of life, a fusion of reptilian and something else. Its skin was a patchwork of scales and chitinous plates, its eyes glowed with an unnerving crimson light, and its jaws were filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. But it wasn't just its appearance that horrified me, it was the sense of wrongness that emanated from it, a chilling aura of temporal distortion. It was a chimera, one of the failed experiments, somehow surviving within the distorted time fields surrounding the sunken city. The creature lunged, its claws extended, and I instinctively fired the pulse rifle. The beam struck the chimera's chest, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, its body began to flicker, to distort, as if the very fabric of its being was unraveling. It shrieked, a sound that ripped through the silence of the temple, a sound that was both animalistic and something else. Something ancient, something alien. The chimera collapsed, its body dissolving into a shimmering mist that quickly dissipated. I lowered the weapon, my hand trembling. I had killed it, but the chilling certainty remained. It wasn't the last. And something far worse, something far more ancient and terrible, lurked in the shadows of time, waiting to be unleashed. The Voidbringer, and I, the unwitting inheritor of Atlantis's doomed legacy, was standing in its path. The glyphs had warned of this, of the coming darkness. And as I stood there, in the ruins of a fallen empire, I knew that the fall of Atlantis wasn't just a historical event. It was a prophecy, a warning echoing across millennia. A warning that I was now desperately, terrifyingly, beginning to understand. Part 10. The Whispers of the Deep. The glyphs pulsed a sickly green, their luminescence casting grotesque shadows that danced with the flickering candlelight. We were huddled in what had once been a grand Atlantean chamber, now a damp, crumbling ruin. The air hung thick and heavy, saturated with the stench of brine and something else, something ancient and unsettling that pricked at the back of my throat. Amelia, pale and trembling, clutched the fragmented ceramic shard we'd found, its own markings echoing those on the wall. "They're connected," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the dripping water that permeated the silence. "The shard, it's a key." Professor Armitage, his face drawn and haggard, peered closer at the wall, his magnifying glass catching the faintest glimmer of light. He traced the glyphs with a shaking finger, muttering under his breath in a language I didn't understand, but that sent a shiver down my spine nonetheless. "Temporal displacement," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "They mastered it. They folded time itself." My heart hammered against my ribs. The implications of his words were staggering, terrifying. If the Atlanteans had truly mastered temporal manipulation, what had become of them? Where had they gone? And more importantly, what had they brought back? The ground beneath us trembled, a low rumble that grew into a guttural roar. The green glyphs on the wall intensified, bathing the chamber in an eerie light. Amelia gasped, dropping the ceramic shard. It landed with a sharp crack, splitting into two pieces. Simultaneously, a section of the wall before us shimmered and distorted, like a heat haze on a summer's day. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs felt like lead, my voice trapped in my throat. Armitage, however, seemed invigorated, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "It's opening," he breathed, his voice filled with a strange mixture of awe and terror. A gateway, a fold in time. The shimmering haze solidified, resolving itself into a swirling vortex of iridescent colors. It pulsed and breathed, a gaping maw leading into an unknown abyss. From its depths, a low, guttural chanting emanated, a sound that resonated deep within my bones, stirring a primal fear I didn't know I possessed. "No," Amelia whimpered, backing away from the portal. We shouldn't." But Armitage was already moving towards it, drawn by an unseen force. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against the shimmering surface. "Atlantis," he murmured, his eyes glazed over. "I'm coming home." He stepped forward, vanishing into the vortex. The chanting intensified for a moment, then abruptly ceased. The portal shimmered once more, then collapsed in on itself, leaving nothing but the cold, damp wall. Amelia and I stood frozen, the silence deafening in the wake of the otherworldly cacophony. The green glyphs on the wall dimmed, their pulsating light fading into nothingness. We were alone, trapped in the ruins of a civilization lost to time, with the chilling knowledge of what lay beyond. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the dripping water and Amelia's soft sobs. I wanted to comfort her, to offer some semblance of hope, but I had none to give. We were trapped, not only within these crumbling walls, but within the terrifying reality of what we had witnessed. Finally, Amelia spoke, her voice trembling. What was that chanting?" I shook my head, unable to articulate the dread that clung to me like a shroud. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, a presence. It had burrowed its way into my subconscious, whispering of ancient horrors and unimaginable power. "I don't know," I whispered back, my voice barely above a breath. "But I don't think it was human." We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too terrified to sleep, listening to the whispers of the deep that seemed to emanate from the very stones around us. The silence was broken only by the occasional scuttling of unseen creatures and the distant rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the island. We were trapped in a nightmare, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the worst was yet to come. The broken ceramic shard lay at our feet, a stark reminder of the gateway we had witnessed, the gateway to a time and place beyond human comprehension. And as the first rays of dawn filtered through the cracks in the ruined walls, I realized that we weren't just exploring the ruins of Atlantis. We were trapped within its web, pawns in a game played across millennia, a game whose rules we were only beginning to understand, and a game that we were destined to lose. The whispers in the deep had awakened, and they were calling to us, beckoning us towards an abyss from which there might be no return. Part 11. The Whispers of the Deep. The submersible shuddered, its lights carving out a fragile cone of illumination in the oppressive blackness. We had descended far beyond the recommended depth, chasing the sonar ghost that pulsed with an eerie regularity, leading us deeper into the abyssal plane. Dr. Aris, his face pale and etched with a desperate focus, adjusted the frequency of the sonar, the ping echoing in the cramped confines of the submersible's cabin. "It's definitely getting stronger," he murmured, his voice strained. "Whatever it is, it's massive." The pressure outside was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to implode our tiny vessel. The metallic groans of the submersible's hull were a constant reminder of our precarious situation. I gripped the armrest, the cold metal biting into my palm. The rhythmic ping of the sonar was a hypnotic drone, punctuated by the crackling static of the comms system. We had lost contact with the surface hours ago. "We're too deep," I said, my voice barely a whisper above the groaning metal. "We need to turn back." Aris shook his head, his eyes glued to the sonar display. "We're so close. We've been chasing this signal for weeks. We can't turn back now." A chill ran down my spine, a prickling unease that had nothing to do with the frigid temperatures of the deep. It was a primal fear, a feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The whispers had started subtly, barely audible above the hum of the submersible's systems. At first, I thought it was the pressure affecting my hearing, but as we descended deeper, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of sibilant voices, just out of reach of comprehension. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. Aris glanced at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fatigue and obsession. "Hear what, Amelia?" "The whispering," I said, my voice barely audible. "It's like chanting." He shook his head dismissively. "It's nothing, just the pressure affecting your ears. We're at extreme depth." But I knew it wasn't the pressure. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into the rhythmic ping of the sonar, a chilling counterpoint to the mechanical sounds of the submersible. They were all around us, emanating from the impenetrable darkness beyond the reach of our lights. Suddenly, the sonar ping stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whispers and the creaking of the submersible. Aris stared at the blank screen, his face a mask of disbelief. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice hollow. Then, the submersible lurched violently. We were thrown against our seats as the vessel began to spin, caught in a powerful current. The lights flickered, threatening to plunge us into complete darkness. "What's happening?" I screamed, clutching at the armrest. Aris frantically worked the controls, but the submersible continued its uncontrolled descent, caught in the grip of an unseen force. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices that seemed to press against the hull, vibrating through the metal and into our bones. I could almost feel them, cold and slick, like the touch of something ancient and malevolent. Then, through the swirling water beyond the viewport, I saw it. A vast, cyclopean structure, rising from the abyssal plain like a monstrous, submerged mountain. Its surface was covered in intricate carvings, symbols that mirrored those we had found in the ruins of Thera and the underwater city near the Azores. It was Atlantean architecture, but on a scale unlike anything we had ever imagined. This was no mere city, this was a colossal monument, a testament to the power and ambition of a civilization lost to time. The submersible continued its downward spiral, drawn towards the structure like a moth to a flame. As we approached, the whispers became clearer, forming words, phrases in a language I didn't understand, but somehow, I knew what they were saying. They were welcoming us. The structure loomed before us, its immense size dwarfing our tiny vessel. A vast, gaping maw opened in its side, a dark, inviting abyss. The submersible was drawn towards it, inexorably, pulled by an unseen force. I looked at Aris, his face a mixture of terror and awe. He reached out, his hand trembling, towards the viewport, as if trying to touch the ancient structure. The whispers reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that filled the cabin, drowning out the groaning of the hull and the frantic whirring of the submersible's failing systems. The darkness beyond the viewport pulsed with an otherworldly light, and in that final moment, I understood. We hadn't found Atlantis. Atlantis had found us. The submersible plunged into the gaping maw, swallowed whole by the ancient structure. The lights went out, and the whispers faded into a chilling silence, broken only by the crushing pressure of the deep. Part 12. The Obsidian Mirror. The glyphs pulsed a sickening green, mirroring the luminescence clinging to the strange device Elias had unearthed. He hadn't slept since the discovery, its unnerving presence seeping into his dreams, transforming them into swirling vortexes of Atlantean architecture and monstrous, bioluminescent creatures. The artifact, no bigger than his hand, was a perfect obsidian sphere, polished to a disturbing reflectivity. It hummed with a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through the bones of his hand and up his arm. He'd tried everything to decipher the glyphs surrounding it. He'd compared them to the fragmented texts he'd inherited from his grandfather, cross-referenced them with the scant surviving Atlantean records in the Vatican archives, even consulted with a cryptographer specializing in ancient languages. All to no avail. The glyphs remained stubbornly enigmatic, a mocking reminder of the knowledge just beyond his grasp. The device pulsed again, stronger this time, and the glyphs flared. Elias flinched, dropping it onto the desk. The obsidian sphere rolled, its surface catching and distorting the candlelight, transforming his study into a kaleidoscope of fractured images. Then, it stopped. The reflection staring back at him was not his own. It was a face etched with an alien beauty, angular and sharp, with eyes that glowed with the same sickly green as the glyphs. The skin was a deep, unsettling shade of blue, and intricate, web-like patterns pulsed beneath its surface. Elias gasped, scrambling back from the desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. The face smiled, a slow, predatory curve of its lips. Curiosity, a voice echoed in his mind, a symphony of whispers that seemed to originate from inside his skull. A dangerous, yet necessary, trait. Elias swallowed, his throat dry. What are you? He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. A guide, the face replied, its voice still resonating within his mind. A guardian, a remnant, of Atlantis? Elias asked, his fear tinged with a flicker of desperate hope. Of something more, the face replied. The obsidian sphere pulsed again, the green light intensifying. Atlantis was but a ripple. A test. A failure. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine. The casual dismissal of a civilization that had haunted his family for generations was unsettling, to say the least. A failure? What do you mean? The face tilted its head, its glowing eyes seeming to bore into Elias's soul. They sought power, control. They sought to harness energies beyond their comprehension. They failed, and what happened to them? Elias stammered, his hands trembling. They became something else, the face whispered, its voice taking on a chillingly detached tone. Something less. The room grew colder, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. The obsidian sphere pulsed with renewed intensity, and the face within seemed to stretch, to distort, to become something other. The elegant, alien features twisted into a grotesque parody of their former selves. The eyes widened, becoming black, bottomless pits. The skin shimmered and shifted, revealing glimpses of something writhing and pulsating beneath the surface. The beautiful, haunting voice was replaced by a guttural growl that reverberated through the room, shaking the very foundations of the house. Elias scrambled back, his mind reeling in terror. He wanted to scream, to run, but he was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the gaze of the monstrous entity within the obsidian sphere. They sought to transcend their limitations, the creature growled, its voice dripping with malice. They sought to become gods. They became monsters. The sphere pulsed again, the light blindingly bright. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, shielding himself from the horrific spectacle. He heard a sickening crack, like bone snapping, and felt a wave of intense heat wash over him. He opened his eyes, his vision blurry and distorted. The obsidian sphere was gone. In its place, a faint green mist swirled above the desk, slowly coalescing into a shape. Elias watched in horrified fascination as the mist solidified, taking on a form that was both humanoid and monstrously alien. It was tall and slender, with long, spindly limbs and clawed hands. Its skin shimmered with the same sickly green luminescence, and its head was elongated, tapering to a point. Two black, empty sockets stared at him, devoid of any semblance of humanity. The creature turned its head, its unseen gaze sweeping across the room. It took a step towards Elias, its movements unnervingly fluid and silent. Elias stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this creature was not a guide, nor a guardian. It was a hunter, and he was its prey. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that promised pain and suffering beyond comprehension. It raised its clawed hand, its sharp talons glinting in the candlelight. Elias closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. This was it, he thought. The end. The legacy of Atlantis, not of majestic cities and advanced technology, but of monstrous beings and unimaginable horror, had finally caught up with him. He waited for the agonizing touch, the tearing of flesh, the chilling embrace of death. But it never came. He opened his eyes, his breath hitched in his throat. The creature was gone. The only evidence of its presence was the lingering green luminescence that clung to the air, slowly fading into the darkness. Elias was alone, trembling in the silence, the chilling words of the obsidian face echoing in his mind. They became monsters. He knew then, with a horrifying clarity, that his quest to uncover the truth about Atlantis had led him not to enlightenment, but to the brink of an abyss far deeper and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. And he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he was not alone. Something was watching him, something ancient and malevolent, something that had been waiting, patiently, in the shadows of time, for its moment to emerge. Part 13. The Echo of Whispers. The glyphs pulsed, a sickening green, like bioluminescent algae blooming on a corpse. Clara traced their contours with a trembling finger. They were different from any she'd encountered before, sharper, more angular, almost angry. The air in the chamber, already frigid, seemed to drop another 10 degrees. She could feel the weight of the glacier above, pressing down, suffocating. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was full, brimming with a malignant presence that made the hairs on her neck prickle. "Professor," she whispered, turning to find Professor Armitage staring into the glyphs, his face a mask of horrified fascination. He didn't respond. He was utterly consumed, his eyes glazed over, a thin line of drool tracing a path down his chin. Clara felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. This was beyond the academic curiosity that had driven them so far. This was something else, something darker. She reached out and touched his arm. He flinched, a violent, jerky movement, and his eyes snapped back into focus. He blinked rapidly, as if surfacing from a deep, unsettling dream. He looked at Clara, his expression confused, then slowly registered his surroundings. A shudder racked his body. I don't remember," he stammered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. What happened?" Clara hesitated. How could she explain the feeling, the overwhelming sense of dread, the way the glyphs had seemed to speak to him? She couldn't. It was too bizarre, too close to the edge of madness. "You were just studying the glyphs," she said, her voice shaky. "You were very focused." Armitage looked back at the glyphs, his eyes now filled with a wary apprehension. He reached into his satchel and pulled out his notebook, his hand still trembling. He began to sketch the symbols, his movements slow and deliberate, his brow furrowed in concentration. These are unlike anything I've ever seen," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "They're older, much older." He continued to sketch, the silence broken only by the scratching of his pencil against the paper. Clara watched him, her unease growing with every passing minute. The air felt heavy, charged, as if a storm were brewing deep within the ice. Then, she heard it. A faint, rhythmic pulse, like a slow, steady heartbeat. It seemed to emanate from the glyphs themselves, resonating through the ice and into her bones. She glanced at Armitage, but he seemed oblivious, lost in his work. The pulsing grew stronger, more insistent, and Clara began to feel a strange pressure building in her head, a dull ache that spread through her temples. She swayed slightly, feeling dizzy, disoriented. The chamber seemed to spin around her, the glyphs blurring into a swirling vortex of green light. The pulsing intensified, becoming a throbbing, rhythmic drone that filled her ears, drowning out all other sounds. The pressure in her head increased, becoming a sharp, stabbing pain. She cried out, clutching her temples, and stumbled back against the icy wall. Armitage finally looked up, his eyes wide with alarm. He dropped his notebook and rushed to her side. "Clara, what is it? What's wrong?" She tried to speak, but her voice was lost in the overwhelming cacophony of the pulsing. She could feel the ice beneath her fingers, cold and hard, but it offered no comfort. The glyphs were the source, she knew, radiating an energy that was both ancient and malevolent. Suddenly, the pulsing stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, the abrupt cessation of the drone leaving a ringing in Clara's ears. She gasped, her breath coming in ragged sobs. The dizziness subsided, and the pain in her head slowly receded. She looked up at Armitage, her eyes filled with fear. "The glyphs," she whispered, her voice hoarse. They did something to me." Armitage looked back at the glyphs, his expression grim. He slowly picked up his notebook and flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the sketches he had made. He stopped at a particular page and stared at it, his face paling. I think I understand," he said, his voice barely audible. "These aren't just symbols, they're instructions." "Instructions?" Clara repeated, her brow furrowed. "Instructions for what?" Armitage swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the glyphs. "Instructions, for opening a gateway." "A gateway?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "A gateway to what?" He pointed to a specific glyph, a complex, interwoven design that resembled a spiral. "This one," he said, his voice trembling. "It represents a transition. A shifting between dimensions." Clara stared at the glyph, her blood running cold. A gateway between dimensions. The thought was terrifying, incomprehensible. What could lie on the other side? What horrors awaited them in the unknown depths of reality? A low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the chamber, a sound that resonated not with the air, but with the very ice itself. Clara and Armitage exchanged a look of pure terror. They were not alone. Whatever the glyphs had awakened, it was here, with them, in the heart of the glacier. And it was hungry. Part 14. The Obsidian Mirror. The whispers intensified as we descended deeper into the ziggurat, now navigating a labyrinth of narrow, obsidian-lined corridors. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of brine and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. Elena clutched the Atlantean artifact tighter, her knuckles white. The faint humming it emitted seemed to pulse in time with the growing whispers, a counterpoint to the chilling chorus. "What are they saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the insidious murmur. I shook my head, fear tightening its grip around my throat. I couldn't decipher the words, but the tone was unmistakably malevolent. It felt as though countless voices, trapped in the very stones themselves, were clawing their way into our minds. They weren't merely speaking, they were intruding. We reached a vast chamber, circular and dominated by a massive structure in the center. It was a colossal obsidian mirror, its surface polished to an unnerving perfection. The faint luminescence emanating from the artifact illuminated the chamber just enough to reveal the true horror of the mirror's surface. It wasn't a reflection I saw staring back at me, but a swirling vortex of colors, greens, blues, and purples, shifting and morphing like a living entity. The whispering seemed to emanate from within the vortex, amplified tenfold. This is a gateway," Elena murmured, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. "A gateway to where?" I asked, my voice strained. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the swirling chaos within the mirror. It felt as if it was pulling me in, beckoning me to cross over into whatever realm lay beyond. Elena pointed to a series of glyphs carved around the base of the mirror. They describe it as a conduit to other realities, other timelines. A chill colder than the icy air of the ziggurat snaked down my spine. Other realities? Other timelines? Was this how the Atlanteans maintained their empire across such vast distances? Did this mirror explain their sudden disappearance and reappearance throughout history? The whispers intensified, becoming almost unbearable. They were no longer just whispers, they were screams, filled with rage and despair. Faces began to flicker within the swirling vortex, distorted and grotesque. They seemed to reach out, their spectral hands clawing at the surface of the obsidian mirror, desperate to escape their confinement. "We need to leave," I said, my voice barely a croak. The room felt as though it was shrinking, the walls closing in on us. The obsidian mirror pulsed, the vortex growing larger, brighter, hungrier. Elena hesitated, her gaze fixed on the mirror. But, the answers are here. We could understand everything. Understanding isn't worth our sanity, I said, grabbing her arm. This place, this thing, it's not meant for us. As I pulled her away, the whispers transformed into a deafening roar. The vortex in the mirror expanded, stretching out towards us like a grasping hand. A wave of cold washed over us, so intense it felt like our very souls were being frozen. Elena cried out as something brushed against her arm. I whirled around, my heart pounding in my chest. Standing between us and the exit was a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded in shadow. Its features were obscured by the darkness, but its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. They burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It raised a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, and pointed at the obsidian mirror. A voice, cold and resonant, echoed through the chamber, speaking in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow, I knew what it meant. Look. Asterisk. The voice seemed to penetrate my mind, forcing me to turn back towards the mirror. The vortex was now a swirling maelstrom, consuming everything in its path. I saw glimpses of other worlds, other times, cities burning, skies filled with strange, unearthly craft, landscapes twisted and deformed beyond recognition. I saw the Atlanteans, not as the noble, advanced civilization depicted in legends, but as something else. Something monstrous. Something that fed on the energy of other realities, other timelines. The figure moved closer, its shadow stretching across the floor like a grasping claw. I could feel its presence, cold and oppressive, suffocating me. Elena whimpered, her body trembling with fear. We are not meant to see this, the figure whispered, its voice now chillingly close to my ear. This knowledge, it will break you. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed by fear. The obsidian mirror pulsed, the vortex reaching out, beckoning me to join the chaos within. I could feel my sanity fraying, the edges of my mind unraveling. This was the truth behind Atlantis, the horrifying secret they had hidden from the world. And now, it was about to consume us. The figure raised its hand again, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. Embrace the abyss, it whispered, its voice a seductive caress. Become one with the void. And then, everything went black. The echoing clang of the Atlantean metal against the stone floor reverberated through what felt like the skeletal remains of a forgotten god. The dropped cylinder lay there, inert, yet buzzing with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Elena, her face pale, knelt beside it, tracing the strange glyphs carved into its surface with a trembling finger. This, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the dripping water. This is unlike anything I've seen before. Older, somehow, more primal. We were deep beneath the Vatican, a level below even the rumored Vatican secret archives, in a place that smelled of dust, decay, and something indescribably ancient. The walls were not the smooth, worked stone of Roman construction, but rough, cyclopean blocks, fitted together with an unnerving precision that spoke of a technology beyond our comprehension. The air hung heavy, thick with an oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant, rhythmic pulse that had drawn us here. The cylinder, unearthed after weeks of painstaking excavation, was a dark, almost black metal, cold to the touch despite the stifling heat radiating from the deeper parts of the cavern. It pulsed with a faint inner light, a sickly green that seemed to writhe beneath the metal's surface. It was this pulse, this rhythmic thrumming, that had first registered on our instruments, a subtle anomaly that had led us down this rabbit hole, into the very heart of a forgotten world. The glyphs, Elena continued, her voice strained, they're changing. I peered closer, holding my breath. The symbols, intricately carved and seemingly immutable only moments ago, were indeed shifting, morphing into new, unfamiliar patterns. The green light within intensified, pulsing in time with the rhythmic beat that resonated through the cavern. It was as if the cylinder was waking, stirring from an eon's long slumber. Suddenly, the ground beneath us trembled. Dust rained down from the ceiling, coating us in a fine layer of grit. The rhythmic pulse intensified, transforming into a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate in our very bones. Fear, cold and primal, gripped my heart. We were tampering with something beyond our understanding, something ancient and powerful. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice shaking. Now, but it was too late. The cylinder began to glow with an almost blinding light. The glyphs on its surface spun and twisted, merging into a single, searing symbol that burned itself into my retinas. The air crackled with energy, and a wave of heat washed over us, forcing us back against the cavern wall. Then, with a deafening roar, the cylinder split open. What emerged was not what we expected. No monstrous creature, no ancient god, but something far more unsettling. A column of shimmering, iridescent light shot upwards from the cylinder, illuminating the cavern with an ethereal glow. Within the light, images flickered and danced. Scenes of a city unlike any I had ever seen. A city of towering spires and shimmering domes, of flying machines and strange, bioluminescent creatures. Atlantis. But this wasn't the Atlantis of myth and legend, the beautiful, utopian city swallowed by the sea. This was something different, something darker. The images flashed faster, showing glimpses of war and destruction, of strange rituals and grotesque sacrifices. The faces of the Atlanteans, once noble and serene, were twisted in agony and fear. The city itself seemed to be writhing, consumed by some unseen force. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the vision ended. The light faded, the cylinder fell silent, and the rhythmic pulse ceased. The cavern was plunged back into darkness, leaving us blinking, disoriented, and utterly terrified. Elena was sobbing, her face buried in her hands. I reached out to comfort her, but my own hands were shaking too badly. We had seen something we were never meant to see, a glimpse into the true nature of Atlantis, a glimpse into its horrifying demise. And then, we heard it. A whisper, faint at first, but growing steadily louder. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the very stones of this ancient place. It was a language we didn't understand, yet somehow, we knew its meaning. It was a warning. The whisper grew into a chant, a chilling, rhythmic incantation that echoed through the cavern. The ground began to tremble again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the cyclopean walls, spreading like spiderwebs across their surface. The chanting intensified, reaching a fever pitch. And then, from the depths of the earth, came the answer. A deep, guttural roar that shook the very foundations of the Vatican. The floor beneath us buckled and heaved. The cavern began to collapse. We were trapped, buried alive in the heart of a forgotten empire, awakened by our own foolish curiosity. And as the darkness closed in around us, I realized a terrifying truth. Atlantis hadn't been lost to time. It had been waiting for us. And now, it was coming back. The guttural clicks and whistles intensified as we descended deeper into the submerged Atlantean archive. Each echoing sound grated on my nerves, a constant reminder of the unseen things that lurked just beyond the flickering beams of our helmet lamps. Amelia, normally stoic and unflappable, gripped her spear gun tighter, her knuckles white beneath her dive gloves. The archive itself was a sprawling labyrinth of coral-encrusted pillars and archways. Inscriptions, hauntingly familiar from the fragmented texts we'd found on the surface, covered every surface. Their meaning, however, remained maddeningly elusive, swirling with half-glimpsed images of power and a chilling, detached cruelty. We reached a large chamber, the centerpiece of which was a colossal statue of a humanoid figure with elongated limbs and what appeared to be gills carved into its neck. It sat on a throne of twisted coral, its eyes, two enormous, milky white orbs, fixed on some unseen point in the distance. The oppressive silence here was broken only by the rhythmic hiss of our regulators. This is disturbing, Amelia muttered, her voice crackling through the comms. More than anything we've seen so far. I nodded, unable to tear my gaze away from the statue. It emanated an aura of ancient power, a sense of something vast and inhuman. Around its base, a mosaic depicted scenes of ritual sacrifice, the victims clearly not human, but grotesque, fish-like creatures with pleading, intelligent eyes. Professor Caldwell, do you see that? Amelia pointed towards a section of the mosaic that depicted a familiar symbol, the spiral we'd found etched into the artifact that started this whole nightmare. But here, the spiral was intertwined with another symbol, one we hadn't encountered before. A stylized, three-pronged trident, dripping with what looked like blood. As we moved closer to examine the new symbol, the clicks and whistles intensified, morphing into a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the very water around us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. We were being watched. We need to move, I said, my voice tight with apprehension. This place, it doesn't feel right. We pressed on, deeper into the archive, the unsettling growl following us like a shadow. The corridors became narrower, the coral thicker, almost as if the structure itself was trying to engulf us. We found more chambers, each filled with bizarre and unsettling artifacts. Preserved specimens of unknown creatures floating in murky tanks, intricate machines whose purpose defied comprehension, and tablets covered in the alien script, whispering of forgotten technologies and unimaginable horrors. In one chamber, we discovered a series of murals depicting a cataclysmic event. Massive waves crashed against towering Atlantean cities, the sky ablaze with strange, multicolored lightning. Amid the chaos, figures identical to the statue in the main chamber watched with cold indifference, their expressions suggesting not sorrow, but a grim satisfaction. They orchestrated it, Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. The flood, they caused it. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The legend of Atlantis, a utopian civilization destroyed by a natural disaster, was a lie. They hadn't been victims, they had been perpetrators. But of what? And why? The growl intensified, closer now, accompanied by a scraping sound, like something large dragging itself along the coral-encrusted walls. We spun around, our lamps cutting through the murky water, searching for the source of the sound. Then, we saw it. Emerging from the shadows of a nearby archway was a creature unlike anything I could have imagined. It was humanoid in shape, but its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, revealing the pulsating organs beneath. Its limbs were elongated and spindly, ending in clawed hands that scraped against the floor. Its head was small and almost reptilian, with the same milky white eyes as the statue, but filled with a predatory hunger. It let out a piercing shriek, a sound that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. Amelia raised her spear gun, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Don't shoot," I hissed. "We don't know what it is." The creature took a shuffling step towards us, its eyes fixated on me. I felt a wave of pure terror wash over me, a primal fear that burrowed deep into my bones. This wasn't just a creature, it was something ancient, something other. Suddenly, the creature stopped, its head tilted as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Then, it turned and retreated back into the shadows, its chilling shriek echoing in the deepening silence. We were left standing there, frozen in place, the only sound the frantic beating of our hearts. We had been spared, but for what purpose? What lurked deeper in the archive, waiting for us? The spiral symbol, now intertwined with the dripping trident, flashed in my mind. The trident, it represented something more than just Atlantis. It represented something far older, something far more sinister. We had stumbled upon a truth far more terrifying than we could have ever imagined. And the ocean itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the horror to unfold. Part 17. The Obsidian Mirror. The rhythmic clicking grew louder, resonating through the cavern's damp air, a sickening counterpoint to the dripping water. Each click felt like a hammer against my skull, a countdown to something terrible. We pressed on, deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the Atlantean structure beneath the Azores, the bioluminescent moss our only guide. Dr. Alvarez, pale and sweating, clutched the device, its screen flickering with fragmented Atlantean script. I think I'm getting something, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. A ritual of renewal. Renewal? I repeated, my voice hollow. The clicking intensified, accompanied now by a low, guttural humming that vibrated in my chest. Yes, Alvarez continued, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. They believed they could shed their failing physical forms and transfer their consciousness into new vessels. Vessels? Elena, ever pragmatic, shone her flashlight ahead. The beam landed on a vast chamber, circular and oppressive. In the center, a platform of polished obsidian, like a giant, black mirror, reflected the faint light back at us. And surrounding it, arranged in a macabre circle, were dozens of humanoid shapes. They weren't statues, they were desiccated, mummified, their skin stretched taut over bone, their faces frozen in expressions of unimaginable agony. Each one was connected to the obsidian platform by a network of thin, metallic tubes, shimmering with a faint, internal light. The tubes snaked across the floor like metallic veins, pulsing in time with the clicking and humming. "Oh God," Elena whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. The clicking stopped, the humming deepened, The metallic tubes glowed brighter. Alvarez pointed to the obsidian platform. Etched into its surface, almost invisible, were intricate symbols. The receptacle, he breathed. The new vessel. I looked closer. A faint, almost imperceptible ripple disturbed the surface of the obsidian mirror. Like a reflection in water, a form began to coalesce within its depths. It was humanoid, but elongated, its limbs thin and almost skeletal. Its head was large and bulbous, with enormous, black eyes that seemed to absorb all light. Fear, cold and paralyzing, gripped me. This wasn't renewal. This was something far more sinister. This was possession. We need to get out of here, I said, my voice strained. But it was too late. The figure within the obsidian mirror solidified. It rose, slowly, its movements unnervingly fluid. It was tall, impossibly tall, its head almost brushing the cavern ceiling. It turned, its black eyes fixing on us, and a wave of pure, unadulterated dread washed over me. This wasn't just an Atlantean. This was something else. Something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting, dormant, for millennia. A voice, resonating not from the creature, but from within my own skull, echoed through my thoughts. Welcome, asterisk, it whispered, its tone chillingly polite. We have been expecting you, asterisk. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. The voice, it was inside my head. Inside all our heads. Elena screamed. The creature, or whatever it was, raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers twitching. The desiccated bodies surrounding the platform began to convulse. Their empty eye sockets glowed with the same unsettling light as the metallic tubes. They're waking up, Alvarez stammered, his face ashen. The mummified Atlanteans rose, their movements jerky and unnatural. They turned towards us, their empty eyes burning with a malevolent light. They were no longer human. They were puppets, controlled by the entity in the obsidian mirror. The creature, its eyes still fixed on us, spoke again, its voice a chilling echo in our minds. The cycle begins anew, asterisk, it said. And you will be our vessels, asterisk. The mummified Atlanteans lurched towards us, their dried limbs cracking and snapping. We were trapped, cornered in the heart of this ancient, subterranean chamber. The creature in the obsidian mirror watched, its black eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. We were about to become part of its twisted ritual, our bodies and minds destined to serve as vessels for this ancient, unimaginable evil. And as the desiccated hands reached for us, I understood. Atlantis hadn't fallen, it had simply transformed. It had waited, patiently, for the right moment to return. And that moment, it seemed, was now. Part 18. The Whispers of the Deep. The glyphs pulsed with a sickly green light, the stone around them radiating a palpable heat. Elias traced their intricate patterns, his fingers brushing against a thin film of moisture that felt strangely organic. He could feel the vibration now, a low hum that resonated deep within his chest, echoing the unsettling rhythm of his own heart. This wasn't just a language, it was a living thing, a dormant consciousness stirring within the ancient stone. It speaks to me, Amelia, he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic sloshing of the seawater against the cavern walls. I can almost understand. Amelia, her face pale and drawn, gripped the makeshift torch tighter, its flickering flame casting grotesque shadows that danced across the glyph-covered walls. The air, thick with the smell of brine and something else, something faintly metallic and sickeningly sweet, made it hard to breathe. Elias, we need to leave. This place, it's wrong. She gestured to the deepening darkness beyond the pool of light. The whispers, a constant murmuring undercurrent they'd noticed since entering the chamber, seemed to be growing louder, coalescing into discernible words. He ignored her, his focus completely consumed by the glyphs. He felt a pull, an irresistible urge to delve deeper, to understand the secrets they held. He pressed his palm against the central glyph, a stylized depiction of a spiraling vortex, and the hum intensified, resonating through his bones. The whispers sharpened. Deeper, come deeper, asterisk. Amelia screamed. Elias looked up, startled. The green light emanating from the glyphs was now pulsing in time with the whispers, casting an eerie, otherworldly glow across the cavern. The metallic scent intensified, making his stomach churn. Elias, look. He followed her gaze. The water in the pool, previously still and murky, was now swirling, forming a vortex that mirrored the glyph he had touched. The whispers became a chorus, echoing around them, pressing in from all sides. Join us, become one, asterisk. The swirling water began to glow, emitting the same sickly green light as the glyphs. Something moved within its depths, something vast and serpentine, its scales shimmering like polished jade. A single, enormous eye, the pupil a vertical slit of pure black, opened in the heart of the vortex, fixing its gaze on Elias. Terror, cold and sharp, pierced through his obsession. He staggered back, pulling his hand away from the glyph. The humming subsided, the light dimmed, but the vortex remained, the eye still watching him, pulsing with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. "What is that?" he gasped, his voice choked with fear. Amelia grabbed his arm, pulling him towards the tunnel they'd entered through. "It doesn't matter. We need to go, now." They ran, the whispers chasing them, the eye burning into their backs. The tunnel seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in, the air thick with the metallic stench. The whispers morphed, twisting into taunts, promises, threats. "You cannot escape, the deep remembers? Atlantis reclaims, asterisk." They stumbled into the main cavern, the relative silence a welcome relief. The bioluminescent flora offered little comfort, their gentle glow now seemed sinister, highlighting the oppressive vastness of the space. The humming, though fainter, persisted, a constant reminder of the horror they had witnessed. They found the others huddled near the entrance, their faces etched with worry. Maria rushed towards them. "What happened?" "We heard screaming, and the ground, it was shaking." Elias, still shaken, could only stammer, "The glyphs, the water, there's something down there." "Something ancient," Amelia added, her voice trembling. "Something, alive." Professor Davies, his face grim, looked from one to the other. "Tell me everything. We need to understand what we're dealing with." As they recounted their experience, a new sound reached their ears, a low, guttural groan that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the city. The ground trembled again, more violently this time, sending dust and debris raining down from the cavern ceiling. "The city, it's waking up," Professor Davies murmured, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "And I fear we've awakened something far more terrible than we could have imagined." The groaning intensified, joined by a chorus of clicks and scrapes that echoed through the cavern, growing closer, surrounding them. The bioluminescent plants dimmed, plunging the vast space into near darkness. From the shadows, something moved. Something vast, with too many limbs and eyes that glowed with the same sickening green light as the glyphs. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling the cavern, drowning out all other sounds. "The deep awakens. Atlantis rises, asterisk." The creatures emerged from the shadows, their forms shifting and distorted in the flickering light. They were the stuff of nightmares, grotesque parodies of marine life, twisted and reshaped by the same ancient power that had claimed Atlantis. And they were hungry. The glyphs shimmered under Amelia's trembling flashlight beam, an eerie blue light reflecting in her wide, terrified eyes. They were different than anything she'd seen before, more intricate, almost organic. They pulsed faintly, like a sleeping heart. The air grew colder, a damp, metallic tang clinging to the back of her throat. The distant hum that had plagued them since entering the city was louder here, a low thrum that vibrated through the very floor, a disturbing counterpoint to the drip, drip, drip of unseen water. This feels wrong," whispered Ben, his voice tight with apprehension. He clutched the shotgun tighter, his knuckles white. He shone his own light around the cavern, the beam catching on polished surfaces that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The cavern stretched beyond the reach of their beams, disappearing into an oppressive, inky blackness that seemed to swallow the light whole. Amelia traced the glyphs with a gloved finger, a shiver crawling down her spine. "They're shifting," she breathed, pulling her hand back as if burned. "I swear, they weren't like this before." The glyphs, etched deep into what looked like obsidian, seemed to writhe and flow beneath her gaze, the lines blurring, reforming, like something alive. Ben swore under his breath. "Let's just get the sample and get out of here," he said, his voice strained. He gestured towards a crystalline formation at the far end of the chamber. It pulsed with the same eerie blue light as the glyphs, radiating an unnatural cold that reached them even from this distance. It was beautiful, in a terrifying, alien way. Amelia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They moved slowly, their boots echoing in the vast chamber, the only sound besides the incessant hum and dripping water. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air itself was growing denser, pressing down on them. The closer they got to the crystalline formation, the colder it became, their breath misting in the air. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine split the silence, making Amelia jump. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a piercing, grating sound that set her teeth on edge. Ben whirled around, his shotgun raised, his eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. "What was that?" he hissed. Amelia shook her head, her ears ringing. I don't know." The whine intensified, growing louder, morphing into a keening wail that seemed to claw at her sanity. The glyphs on the walls pulsed faster, their blue light intensifying, bathing the chamber in a sickly, ethereal glow. The crystalline formation at the far end began to vibrate, the ground trembling beneath their feet. "We need to go, now," Ben yelled over the din. He grabbed Amelia's arm and pulled her towards the tunnel they'd entered through. But it was too late. The ground beneath them buckled, throwing them off their feet. Amelia cried out as she hit the hard floor, the wind knocked out of her. Ben scrambled to his feet, his face pale with terror. The wailing reached a fever pitch, a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter their eardrums. The walls of the cavern seemed to ripple and distort, the glyphs swirling in a dizzying, hypnotic dance. And then, from the shadows at the far end of the chamber, something moved. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form obscured by the shifting light and the swirling dust kicked up by the tremor. But Amelia could make out the outline of limbs, long and spindly, and a head that seemed too large for its body. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the floor as if floating. The keening wail seemed to emanate from it, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony. Ben raised his shotgun, his hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. "Get behind me," he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. Amelia scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest like a drum. She stumbled back, her eyes fixed on the creature emerging from the shadows. As it moved closer, the light caught its face, revealing features that were both alien and horrifyingly familiar. It had the same high cheekbones and elongated skull as the skeletal remains they'd found earlier, but its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, stretched taut over its bones. Its eyes, huge and black, burned with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It raised a hand, its long, skeletal fingers tipped with claws that gleamed like polished obsidian. The wailing stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilling silence broken only by the heavy thud of its footsteps. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread that settled over them like a shroud. Amelia knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that they were not alone. Atlantis had not been lost. It had been waiting, and now, it had awakened. The creature opened its mouth, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. A low growl rumbled in its chest, a sound that promised pain, a sound that heralded the end. And in that moment, Amelia understood the true horror of what they had unearthed. They hadn't just discovered a lost civilization. They had opened a door to something far older, far more terrible, than they could ever have imagined. Something that should have remained buried in the depths of time. The glyphs glowed with an unsettling, pulsing light, bathing the cavern in an eerie, underwater shimmer. Elena traced a finger across the cold, smooth surface, the strange symbols radiating a subtle heat that belied their ancient origins. Around them, the cavern walls seemed to breathe, the shifting patterns of bioluminescent algae creating the illusion of movement, of a living, breathing entity. It was a beautiful, terrifying spectacle. This is beyond anything I could have imagined," whispered Dr. Moreau, his voice barely audible above the rhythmic thrumming that now emanated from the glyphs. The thrumming resonated deep within their chests, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to massage their internal organs, a disconcerting sensation that bordered on the painful. The air thickened, becoming heavy and charged with an unfamiliar energy. Elena felt a tingling sensation across her skin, the hairs on the back of her neck prickling with an instinctive dread. The whispers, once faint and distant, now grew louder, coalescing into a chorus of guttural pronouncements, a language alien and chilling. They spoke of power, of sacrifice, of a return. They're chanting, stammered Sergeant Miller, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle slung across his back. His eyes, wide with fear, darted around the cavern, searching for the source of the whispers. "There's nothing there, Sergeant," said Captain Davies, his voice strained. He, too, felt the oppressive weight of the unseen presence, the insidious encroachment of something ancient and powerful. The glyphs pulsed brighter, the thrumming intensifying until it felt like their bones were vibrating. The floor beneath them began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the cavern walls, revealing the raw, pulsating flesh beneath the thin veneer of rock, as if the earth itself was alive and writhing in agony. Then, from the depths of the cavern, a shape began to coalesce. It was indistinct at first, a shimmering distortion in the water-filled air, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But slowly, agonizingly, it began to take form. It was humanoid, towering over them, its form composed of the same shimmering, bioluminescent algae that coated the cavern walls. Its features were indistinct, obscured by the shifting patterns of light, but two burning, crimson eyes pierced the ethereal veil, fixing upon them with a predatory intensity. The chanting grew louder, reaching a fever pitch as the entity stretched out a hand, its fingers long and skeletal, tipped with razor-sharp claws of obsidian. "Back!" roared Captain Davies, shoving Elena and Dr. Moreau behind him. He raised his rifle, but his hands trembled so violently he could barely aim. Sergeant Miller, paralyzed with terror, could only stare at the approaching figure, his rifle dangling uselessly at his side. The entity stopped just short of them, its immense form filling the cavern. The air crackled with an unnatural energy, the oppressive silence broken only by the rhythmic throbbing of the glyphs and the creature's ragged, almost imperceptible breathing. It lowered its head, its unseen face inches from Captain Davies. The whispers intensified, focusing on him, weaving their way into his mind. He felt a searing pain behind his eyes as images flooded his consciousness. Vast cities sinking beneath the waves, monstrous creatures rising from the depths, a world consumed by darkness. He saw himself, not as he was, but as a slave, a sacrifice, offered up to appease the ancient gods. His knees buckled, his rifle clattering to the ground. He looked up at the entity, his eyes glazed over, a vacant smile spreading across his lips. He reached out a trembling hand, as if to embrace his tormentor. "Captain!" screamed Elena, but her voice was lost in the deafening roar of the whispers. The entity's hand closed around Captain Davies' wrist, its grip like a vice. The captain's scream was cut short as a wave of energy surged through his body, his form contorting, twisting into something unnatural, something inhuman. His skin shimmered with the same bioluminescent algae that coated the entity, his eyes burning with the same crimson fire. Elena and Dr. Moreau scrambled back, their hearts pounding in their chests. They watched in horror as Captain Davies, now a grotesque parody of his former self, turned towards them, a chilling smile etched on his face. "Join us," he rasped, his voice a hollow echo of its former self. "Embrace the return." The entity turned its gaze towards Elena and Dr. Moreau, its crimson eyes burning with an unholy light. The chanting intensified, the whispers swirling around them, promising power, promising immortality, promising oblivion. Elena knew, with a chilling certainty, that they were not going to escape this cavern alive. The Atlantis they had sought was not a lost paradise, but a living nightmare. And they were about to become its newest victims. The final glyph on the wall pulsed one last time, then faded to black. The thrumming stopped. The only sound was the slow, deliberate dripping of water, and the soft, wet chuckle of Captain Davies, their former captain, now a herald of the deep. The glyphs shimmered, an unsettling iridescent blue against the obsidian wall. Elias traced their intricate patterns, feeling a chill seep from the stone into his bone. He understood now, with a sickening clarity, what the Atlantean Empire truly was. Not a utopian society lost to the waves, but something far more sinister, something that had reached across millennia with grasping, skeletal fingers. They weren't just manipulating time, Elias whispered, his voice hoarse. They were weaving it, using it as a weapon. Catherine, her face pale and drawn, nodded. She clutched the fragmented clay tablet, its own cryptic symbols echoing the ones on the wall. "The echoes we've been experiencing, the anachronisms, it's not accidental. It's deliberate. They're testing us." The air in the cavern grew heavy, the silence punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of unseen water. They were deep beneath the forgotten city they'd discovered, a city that had pulsed with a strange, alien energy before collapsing in on itself, leaving this echoing labyrinth as its sole legacy. A labyrinth that felt less like a ruin and more like a waiting room. Testing for what? Daniel asked, his voice tight with a fear he couldn't mask. Elias shook his head, his gaze fixed on the wall. The glyphs seemed to writhe and shift in his peripheral vision. I don't know, but I have a feeling it's not good. The tablet in Catherine's hands vibrated suddenly, a low hum resonating through the chamber. The glyphs on the wall pulsed in response, bathing the cavern in an eerie blue light. The air shimmered, and a figure began to coalesce in the center of the room. It was humanoid, but elongated, its limbs impossibly thin, its head large and bulbous. Its skin was a sickly, translucent gray, and its eyes, large and black, seemed to absorb the light around them. It didn't move, but a sense of immense power emanated from it, pressing down on them like a physical weight. An Atlantean, Catherine breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The figure's mouth, a thin slit in its pale face, opened. No sound came out, but a voice echoed in their minds, cold and ancient, speaking in a language they didn't understand, yet somehow, they knew. Assessment initiated. Asterisk. The air grew colder, the blue light intensified. The glyphs on the wall swirled, faster and faster, until they were a blur of iridescent blue. The ground beneath their feet trembled. The voice echoed again, colder, sharper. Subjects exhibiting potential. Asterisk. Daniel whimpered, backing away. What's happening? What does it want? Elias felt a creeping dread crawling up his spine. He understood, with terrifying clarity, what the Atlanteans had been doing all this time. They hadn't been destroyed. They had retreated, withdrawn into the folds of time, observing, experimenting, waiting. Waiting for the right moment to return. And now, it seemed, that moment was approaching. Integration commencing. Asterisk. The blue light pulsed again, blindingly bright. Elias squeezed his eyes shut, a scream building in his throat. He felt a searing pain in his head, as if his skull was splitting open. Images flashed through his mind, swirling vortexes of time, impossible geometries, alien landscapes. He heard whispers, a chorus of voices speaking in that same chilling, alien language. He felt something cold and metallic pressing against his skin, something snaking its way into his veins. He opened his eyes, his vision blurred and distorted. He saw Catherine and Daniel, their faces contorted in silent screams, the same blue light engulfing them. He saw the Atlantean figure, its black eyes burning into his soul. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound came out. His body felt numb, distant, as if it no longer belonged to him. The voice echoed one last time, resonant and triumphant. Assimilation complete. Asterisk. The blue light faded. The Atlantean figure vanished. The glyphs on the wall returned to their static state, their iridescent glow extinguished. Silence descended on the cavern, broken only by the steady drip, drip, drip of unseen water. Elias stood there, his body trembling, his mind reeling. He looked at Catherine and Daniel. They stood motionless, their eyes vacant, their faces devoid of expression. He reached out to touch Catherine's arm, his hand passing through her as if she were a ghost. He recoiled, a strangled gasp escaping his lips. He was alone. He looked down at his hands. They shimmered, an unsettling iridescent blue against the darkness. He understood then. He wasn't Elias anymore. He was something else. Something more. He closed his eyes, and a cold, alien voice echoed in his mind. Await further instructions. Asterisk. The cavern remained silent, a tomb waiting to be opened. The Atlantean Empire, lost in time, had found its way back. Not through conquest, but through infiltration. And the world, unsuspecting, remained blissfully unaware of the insidious tendrils that had already begun to weave their way through the fabric of reality. The testing was over. The assimilation had begun. Part 22. The Obsidian Heart. The glyphs pulsed, a rhythmic beat of sickly green light that mirrored the growing unease in my stomach. Amelia, pale and silent, traced the carvings with a trembling finger. We were deep beneath the ziggurat, in a chamber that felt impossibly ancient, the air thick with the dust of forgotten millennia. The circular room was dominated by a raised dais, upon which sat a heart-shaped object of polished obsidian, larger than a man. Veins of luminescent green, the same unsettling shade as the glyphs, pulsed within its depths. The obsidian heart, Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible above the rhythmic thrumming emanating from the dais. The source. The air shimmered, and the elder appeared, his translucent form flickering like a dying flame. He looked weaker than before, his spectral features drawn and haggard. He drifted towards the obsidian heart, his ethereal hand passing through it. This was their hub, he murmured, his voice a ghostly sigh. The nexus of their temporal manipulation. They drew power from the very fabric of time itself, twisting it, warping it, to their will. He turned to us, his spectral eyes filled with a profound sorrow. They believed they were architects of a better future, but they became prisoners of their own ambition. They fragmented time, shattered it into 1,000 shards, and in doing so, they fractured themselves. I felt a chill crawl down my spine, a premonition of something terrible. What happened to them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The elder's form flickered violently. They became unstuck, scattered across the fractured timelines. Some were flung into the distant future, others hurled back into the primordial past. Most ceased to be in any coherent sense. Their essence dissolved, absorbed into the temporal chaos they had created. He looked at the obsidian heart, his spectral face contorted in a grimace of pain. This is the anchor. The last vestige of their power. And it's failing. The green veins within the obsidian heart pulsed faster, the rhythmic thrumming growing louder, morphing into a low, guttural hum that resonated deep within my bones. The air grew heavy, oppressive, making it difficult to breathe. Amelia stumbled back, clutching her head. I can feel it, pulling at me. The glyphs on the walls flared, bathing the chamber in an intense green light. The obsidian heart began to vibrate, the hum escalating into a deafening roar. Cracks, hairline fractures of luminescent green, spider-webbed across its surface. The anchor is breaking, the elder shrieked, his form flickering wildly. Time itself is unraveling. The room began to spin. The walls blurred, the glyphs becoming streaks of blinding light. I felt a nauseating lurch, a sensation of being pulled in 1,000 different directions. The floor beneath my feet seemed to dissolve, and I fell, tumbling into a swirling vortex of emerald green. Time became fluid, a chaotic soup of moments and memories. I saw flashes of Atlantis in its prime, gleaming towers reaching towards the heavens, Atlantean citizens with their unsettlingly familiar features walking the streets. Then, abrupt shifts to scenes of unimaginable horror. Cities crumbling, skies ablaze, monstrous creatures stalking the ruins. I saw glimpses of myself, different versions of myself, in different times, different places. A soldier in ancient Rome, a peasant in medieval Europe, a scientist in a futuristic metropolis. Each iteration flashed before my eyes, then vanished, leaving me with a growing sense of disorientation and dread. I saw Amelia too, caught in the temporal maelstrom. Her face, contorted in terror, appeared and disappeared, flickering like a faulty hologram. I reached out to her, but my hand passed through her image, grasping only empty air. The elder's voice, distorted and echoing, reverberated through the chaos. The timelines, collapsing, converging. The vortex intensified, the green light blinding. The roaring in my ears grew louder, drowning out all other sounds. I felt myself being stretched, pulled, torn apart. My body, my mind, my very being, fractured into a million pieces, scattered across the shattered remnants of time. Then, darkness. A vast, empty void where time had no meaning, where existence itself was a fleeting illusion. I floated in this nothingness, a disembodied consciousness adrift in the wreckage of a broken universe. A single thought, a flicker of awareness, remained. What if Atlantis wasn't just lost in time? What if it was the loss of time itself? And in its destruction, it took everything with it. The obsidian heart shattered, and so did we. The glyphs swam before Amelia's eyes, swirling like the chaotic currents of a whirlpool. The Atlantean language, once a tantalizing puzzle, now felt like a tightening noose. Translated, the inscription spoke of a ritual, a horrifying synchronization that would usher in the final phase of Atlantis's return. A shiver colder than the Arctic ice they'd traversed crawled down her spine. The synchronization wasn't just a metaphorical return, it was a physical, violent merging of timelines. Elias, his face a mask of grim determination, paced the confined space of the submersible. We have to stop it. Whatever the cost. Amelia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. They had followed the energy signature, a pulsing, almost living beacon, to this underwater cavern, hidden beneath a shelf of glacial ice thicker than any they'd encountered. Inside, nestled amongst the cyclopean ruins of an Atlantean outpost, was a machine unlike anything they had ever seen. It pulsed with the same unnerving energy as the signal, a shimmering sphere of obsidian-like material held within a cage of intricately carved metal. The inscription calls it the Chronos engine, Amelia finally managed, her voice raspy. It anchors their timeline to ours. Once it fully activates, the merging will be complete. The submersible's sonar pinged, revealing movement in the cavern. Shadows shifted in the periphery of their lights, coalescing into shapes. Atlantean warriors, clad in shimmering armor that seemed to absorb the light, their faces obscured by grotesque, fish-like masks. Their weapons, long, spear-like objects that hummed with energy, were pointed directly at them. "They know we're here," Elias muttered, his hand hovering over the submersible's limited defense systems. "We have to disable the engine. Any ideas?" Amelia's gaze was fixed on the Chronos engine. The pulsing was getting faster, stronger. Time was running out. The inscription mentions a control rod, a key of sorts. It's inside the sphere." Elias swore under his breath. "Inside that thing? We'd be exposed to whatever energy it's radiating." "We don't have a choice," Amelia said, her voice laced with a chilling calm. "It's this or watch the world as we know it be torn apart." They prepared for the breach. Elias activated the submersible's emergency cloaking device, a desperate gamble that bought them precious seconds. Then, with a deafening hiss, the outer hatch opened, exposing them to the icy water and the watchful gaze of the Atlantean warriors. The water was shockingly cold, numbing Amelia's skin instantly. But she pushed forward, propelled by a grim determination. The Atlantean warriors advanced, their spear-like weapons crackling with energy. Elias fired the submersible's pulse cannons, creating a momentary distraction, but it wouldn't hold them for long. Amelia reached the Chronos engine, the pulsing energy washing over her in waves, making her head spin. She could feel a strange pull, a disorienting sensation of being unmoored from time itself. The cage surrounding the obsidian sphere was intricate, a puzzle of interlocking metal pieces. She worked frantically, her numb fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar mechanisms. The Atlantean warriors closed in, their spear-like weapons raised to strike. Elias's pulse cannons were silent now, out of energy. Just as one of the warriors lunged, spear pointed at Amelia's back, a sharp crack echoed through the cavern. The warrior froze, then shattered into a million pieces, like glass hitting concrete. Standing behind the shattered remains was Anya, her face pale but resolute, wielding a strange, pulsating weapon unlike anything Amelia had seen before. It seemed to draw energy from the very air around it. "Took me long enough to find this damned place," Anya said, her voice tight. Together, they fought off the remaining warriors, Anya's weapon proving surprisingly effective against their advanced technology. Finally, with a grinding click, the last piece of the cage slid open. Inside, the obsidian sphere pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. Amelia reached inside, her hand brushing against something cold and smooth. She grasped it, pulled it out. It was a rod of polished crystal, humming with the same energy as the sphere, but somehow, different. Calmer. As she pulled the rod free, the pulsing of the Chronos engine intensified, the light within the sphere growing brighter, whiter. The entire cavern began to shake, the very structure groaning under an immense strain. "Get back to the sub," Amelia yelled, clutching the control rod tightly. They retreated, Anya covering their escape with her pulsating weapon. They scrambled back into the submersible, sealing the hatch just as the cavern behind them imploded, the Chronos engine collapsing in on itself, taking the remaining Atlantean warriors with it. The submersible bucked violently, caught in the aftershocks of the implosion. The lights flickered, died. Then, silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch on forever. In the darkness, Amelia clutched the control rod, its cool surface a small comfort in the face of the unknown. Had they stopped it? Had they averted the merging of timelines? Or was this just the beginning of something far worse? She couldn't shake the feeling that even in the crushing darkness of the deep ocean, they were still being watched. The Atlantean glyphs pulsed with a sickly, internal light. Alara traced their contours with a trembling finger, the stone cool and smooth beneath her skin. The cavern air, thick with the scent of brine and something far older, something faintly metallic and organic, pressed against her like a shroud. The translated text, shimmering on the digital display of Professor Anya Sharma's tablet, confirmed their worst fears. A failsafe, Anya whispered, her voice hollow. Activated by temporal disruption. Alara swallowed, the lump in her throat refusing to budge. They had found the Atlantean heart, the nexus of their power, buried beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara. But this wasn't the triumphant discovery they'd hoped for. This was a tomb waiting to be unsealed. The glyphs spoke of a contingency, a final, desperate measure enacted should Atlantis's carefully constructed timelines ever unravel. A failsafe designed to reset existence, to scour the interlopers, the surface dwellers, from the tapestry of time. And their expedition, their very presence here, was the catalyst. They didn't vanish, Alara breathed, understanding dawning with horrifying clarity. They retreated, into time itself. Anya nodded grimly, her eyes fixed on the pulsating glyphs. And this is their return. The tremors started subtly, a barely perceptible vibration deep within the earth. Then, they intensified, the cavern walls groaning under the strain. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the Atlantean glyphs glowed brighter, a blinding, otherworldly blue. "We have to get out of here," Alara said, her voice strained. But it was too late. The ground beneath them buckled, splitting open in jagged fissures. A wave of intense heat washed over them, followed by a blast of air so cold it burned. The tablet in Anya's hands flickered and died. They were plunged into darkness. When Alara's vision cleared, she was no longer in the cavern. She was standing on a beach, the sand beneath her feet warm and soft. The air was thick with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the rhythmic crash of waves filled her ears. But this wasn't the familiar coastline of the Sahara. The sky above was a kaleidoscope of swirling colors, dominated by an unsettling shade of violet. Strange, bioluminescent plants lined the shore, casting an eerie, pulsating light. And in the distance, towering structures, gleaming like obsidian, pierced the alien sky. Atlantis. But not the ruined city they had been excavating. This was Atlantis in its prime, vibrant and alive. Anya was beside her, her face pale with shock. "Temporal displacement," she murmured, her voice trembling. "The fail-safe, it's thrown us back." Around them, figures began to emerge from the shimmering city. Tall, graceful humanoids with skin that shimmered like polished pearl. Their eyes, large and almond-shaped, glowed with the same unearthly blue as the glyphs in the cavern. They moved with an unsettling grace, their movements fluid and almost hypnotic. One of them, taller than the rest, and adorned in elaborate, bioluminescent garments, approached them. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes scanning them with an unnerving intensity. Alara felt a prickle of fear crawl down her spine. This wasn't the curiosity of a scientist encountering a new species. This was the cold, calculating gaze of a predator assessing its prey. He spoke, his voice a melodious chime that resonated deep within Alara's bones, a language she somehow understood. "You are not of this time," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "Interlopers. A contagion." Anya, finding her voice, spoke, the words tumbling out in a rush. We didn't mean to. We were studying your civilization. Trying to understand." The Atlantean's expression remained unchanged. "Understanding?" he echoed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "You seek to understand that which you cannot comprehend. You seek to unravel the threads of time, oblivious to the consequences." He raised a hand, and the other Atlanteans moved closer, encircling them. Alara felt a growing sense of dread. They were trapped, not just in the past, but in a reality that was about to be erased. "The failsafe is initiated," the Atlantean continued, his voice resonating with power. "The timelines will be purged. Balance will be restored." He turned his gaze to the violet sky, and Alara followed his gaze. High above, a shimmering portal was opening, a swirling vortex of colors that seemed to suck the very light from the world. "This reality, this iteration, it will cease to be," the Atlantean said, his voice a low hum. "And you will be unmade." The ground began to tremble again, more violently this time. The towering structures of Atlantis began to crumble, the shimmering city dissolving into dust. The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality tearing apart. Alara reached for Anya's hand, their fingers intertwining. They stood there, on the crumbling shore of a dying world, as the vortex in the sky expanded, swallowing everything in its path. This wasn't just the end of their expedition. This was the end of everything. The last thing Alara saw, before the darkness consumed them, was the cold, indifferent gaze of the Atlantean, a silent testament to the terrifying power of a civilization lost in time, a civilization that would rather destroy everything than be understood. The glyphs pulsed a sickly green, the chamber vibrating with a power that felt both ancient and terrifyingly alive. Around us, the skeletal Atlanteans stirred, their empty sockets fixed on us with a hunger that transcended physical need. Amelia clutched my arm, her breath catching in her throat. We were trapped, caught in the heart of a machine designed to rewrite history, a machine fueled by the echoes of a fallen empire. We have to stop it, she whispered, her voice trembling. Before it's too late. But how? The console before us, covered in those pulsating glyphs, hummed with a power that felt beyond our comprehension. We were facing a technology that dwarfed even the most advanced discoveries of our time, a technology wielded by an extinct civilization that had mastered the very fabric of time itself. I reached out, my hand hovering over the console. The glyphs seemed to react, their green glow intensifying, drawing me in with a siren's call. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I recoiled, the whispers in my mind growing louder, more insistent. They spoke of power, of control, of reshaping the world in Atlantis' image. Amelia grabbed my hand, pulling me back. Don't, Thomas, it's affecting you. She was right. The closer I got to the console, the more I felt the insidious pull of Atlantis, the whispers promising a power I couldn't comprehend. It was the same lure that had driven Elias mad, the same whisper that had echoed through the ages, promising a return to glory. We had to find another way. My gaze swept across the chamber, searching for anything, any clue that could help us escape this temporal nightmare. The skeletal Atlanteans continued their slow, deliberate movements, their presence a constant, chilling reminder of the Empire's horrifying demise. Then I saw it, a small, almost unnoticeable crack in the wall, near the ceiling. It was barely visible, obscured by the flickering green light, but it was there. A flaw in their perfect machine, a weakness in their seemingly impenetrable fortress. Amelia, look, I whispered, pointing. Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope igniting in their depths. We had to reach it, but the console, the heart of the temporal engine, stood between us and our only chance of escape. The skeletal Atlanteans blocked our path, their bony fingers twitching, their empty sockets burning with an eerie green light. We had to create a distraction. I'll draw their attention, Amelia said, her voice surprisingly firm. You get to the crack. Find a way out. Before I could protest, she grabbed a piece of fallen debris and hurled it across the chamber. The clattering sound echoed in the vast space, instantly drawing the attention of the skeletal guardians. They turned, their movements surprisingly swift, and began to converge on Amelia, their silent menace palpable. It was now or never. I sprinted towards the wall, weaving through the skeletal figures, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the wall, my fingers searching for purchase on the smooth, cold surface. The crack was higher than I'd initially thought, almost out of reach. I jumped, grabbing the edge of the crack, my fingers scraping against the stone. I pulled myself up, my muscles screaming in protest, the whispers in my mind intensifying, urging me to give in, to embrace the power of Atlantis. I ignored them, focusing all my energy on reaching the crack. I pulled myself higher, my head finally reaching the opening. I peered into the darkness beyond, a sliver of light visible in the distance. Hope surged through me. Suddenly, a skeletal hand grabbed my ankle, its icy grip sending a shiver down my spine. I looked down to see one of the skeletal Atlanteans reaching for me, its empty sockets burning with a terrifying intensity. More were closing in, drawn by the commotion. Thomas, Amelia screamed. I kicked out, my foot connecting with the skeletal figure's chest, sending it stumbling back. I pulled myself the rest of the way through the crack, collapsing onto the cold stone floor beyond. I lay there for a moment, catching my breath, the echoes of Amelia's screams ringing in my ears. I had to go back. I had to save her. But as I struggled to my feet, the ground began to shake violently. The entire chamber was collapsing, the temporal engine tearing itself apart. The green glow intensified, engulfing the skeletal Atlanteans, the console, everything. The whispers in my mind reached a crescendo, then abruptly ceased. The last thing I saw before the crack sealed shut, plunging me into darkness, was Amelia's face, illuminated by the eerie green light, a look of defiant terror etched upon her features. I stumbled through the darkness, the weight of my failure crushing me. I had escaped the heart of Atlantis, but at what cost? The temporal engine was destroyed, its threat neutralized, but the echoes of Atlantis, the whispers of its power, still lingered in my mind, a chilling reminder of the empire lost in time, and the woman I left behind. The world was safe, but my own personal hell had just begun.